Hey, good evening, everybody, and everybody online. Pastor Carl's not here tonight, so you guys get to hear me share. I don't mess it up so bad. So I ask that you guys be with me, bear with me, and just try to tough out what I have to share. Father God, we're so grateful for this night, Lord. Thank you for this time that we can get together, Lord, and just go through your word, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you speak through me, Lord. Use me as a vessel, Lord, and that ultimately whatever is spoken here, Lord, that it glorifies you, Lord. So thank you, Lord, for this evening. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. All right. So I'm going to go through a couple of topics tonight. I might be jumping all over, so if there's some confusion, I do apologize. This is my first time other than any like high school and junior high teaching, so this is the first time in front of adults. So I don't know about attention spans or whatever, but for youth group stuff, it was always make it quick. So bear with me on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a couple of topics. I'm going to go over the authority of Christ, and then after that, I'm going to go over the preeminence of Christ. And after that, we're going to go back and revisit what Pastor Carl talked about in Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to do a comparison on temptations. So I'm going to start with leadership. But before I moved here, I was a manager, and I managed IT and security operations, and I had 14 people that worked for me. And the one thing that I learned in my time working for anybody is if there is a manager that has to say the words, "I'm the boss," that tells you right away that person's not in charge. That kind of makes it very clear, and that's evident. If you have to, and I've been guilty of it a couple of times, that makes me not a good dad, but I've had to tell my children sometimes, "Hey, I'm the father here." And at that point, I know that I kind of lost the battle because I'm not setting a good example as a leader. So in leadership, the way that works is you provide leadership by example, by serving, and by guiding. And we look at Jesus, and he's in the same mindset. But we know that when Jesus came, he did not say, "Hey, I'm the chosen one. Worship me. I'm the guy. Everyone's been waiting for me. Here I am." He didn't say anything like that. In fact, he did the opposite. And we see that in his teachings and the way he went about. When he just went from town to town, when he built his discipleship following and the people that were following him, he simply shared a message. He told them, "Follow me," and they followed. Because his words were that powerful. They cut to the heart. They were very deep, the messages that were coming out. But when we go through the word, and I always emphasize this, and I might sound like a broken record if you guys have heard this before, but you have to know the Bible. You can't just trust anybody that's up here. And I know that Pastor Carl does a great job, and he goes through the word and he doesn't deviate. But if I say anything and that you guys can't question it because you don't read your word, then you can just take whatever I say and kind of make it the truth. So I suggest that you guys, it's important that you learn, read this, let it be your daily bread. When you hear Christ being mentioned and someone tries to lower him at any level from where he is king, he's on his throne. There's no question about that. Sometimes certain religions or people want to lower Jesus, which allows man to rise up. And that's when sometimes people would say like, "Oh, no, I want to do it my way," being prideful. And that is where contention happens because they want to lower Jesus or put Jesus in a box and worship him in one way. No other way, their way. And that's something that we're going to look at when I talk about his authority when he came. So I'm going to look at Matthew chapter 13, and I'm going to read verses 53 to 57. And this is when Jesus actually goes and he's sharing parables in his hometown. It says in Matthew chapter 13, verse 53, when Jesus was finished with these parables, he left there and went to his hometown and began to teach them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, where did this man get this wisdom and such miraculous powers? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother called Mary, his brothers James, Joseph, and Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, aren't they all with us? So where did he get all these things? And they were all offended by him. When you look at all those words, one sentence stands out. One of the words, the sentence they said is, isn't this the carpenter's son? And when it comes to Jewish history, they kept genealogical lines, right, in the temple and in the synagogues. They knew Joseph. They knew Joseph's lineage. And there was no doubt. They called Joseph the carpenter. The lineage is kept accurately, and they knew that he can be traced back directly to King David. That actually puts Jesus as standing in line for the throne. But again, they tried to lower him a little bit, and they didn't even recognize Joseph as the line to the throne. And their mindset, again, they're thinking of a small nation. They're not thinking of the King of Heaven. They're not thinking of the King of Heaven and earth, the one who created it all. Another example, we have the Centurion. And if you guys understand centurions, it just means 100, right? Or 80 to 100, that's the count of people. To become a Roman centurion, a soldier needed to demonstrate exceptional combat skills, leadership potential, and a strong understanding of military discipline and tactics. They were expected to be physically fit, proficient with all common weapons, and capable of inspiring and leading their troops. Beyond military prowess, centurions needed to be literate, possess good judgment, and be respected by their peers and their superiors. So we have this one encounter, and I think it's also mentioned in Luke, but I'm going to go through Matthew chapter 8. And the centurion approaches Jesus. And the centurion had a servant that he wanted healed. So it says, Lord, the centurion replied, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority. Having soldiers under my command, I say to this one, go, and he goes, and I say to the other, come. And he comes. And to my servant, I say, do this, and he does it. Now, the way he's wording it here, he understands clearly what authority is. Because, like he said, he says he's a man under authority. But if you look at the line that he said, but just say the word. So imagine there's a centurion who most likely has gone through battle. You don't achieve that title unless you've gone through some stuff, especially during the time of the Roman occupation. And he's, in his confidence, he's looking at Jesus and he's saying, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Can you imagine the mindset of a person understanding such authority that if he trusted that Jesus would just speak it, he trusted that his servant would be healed? That actually shows us that he recognizes Jesus as a commander. I mean, we know that we read that Jesus is the commander of the Lord's army. This guy gets it. And he was not even a Jew at the time. He was an outsider. Now we're going to go to the temple guard. We're going to look, there were two times that we read, I think John mentions it twice, I'm trying to remember, I didn't write down the verses. But when Jesus went to the temple, and on two occasions, he fastened ropes and made whips. And he started beating the money changers. and cleaning the temple. But no one stopped him. In any of those two instances, we read that nobody tried to stop him. They actually let it happen. And that kind of puzzled me the first time I read it. It's like, didn't anybody try to stop him? And nobody dared. And I always had that lingering in the back of my mind, like, okay, here he is, he's causing all this ruckus, but nobody's saying anything. So I'm going to look at, and this is part of John. I'm going to describe a couple of situations about the temple guard and some of the reading that we're going to understand, and then I'll cover some of their history. And it says, after this, and this is when Jesus was in the garden after the Last Supper, when they were going to come and get him to take him over to the Sanhedrin. It says, after these things, they went out to the disciples across the Kidron Valley, and there was a garden his disciples went into. Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus was often there with his disciples. So Judas took a company of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees and came with them with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, went out and said, "Who is it that you're seeking?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth," they answered. He said, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was also standing with him. And when Jesus told them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell on the ground. There was sorry guys, sometimes I can't even read my notes, so I apologize.
I have a question.
What's up?
Okay, so you said that the Centurion wasn't a Jew at the time?
No, he was a Roman.
Well, what do you mean at the time?
Well, he didn't convert. I said the wrong words. I apologize for that.
I was confused.
Yeah, no, he was a Roman, and there was nothing said about him after that. So he was a Roman centurion. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So in the temple service, if you guys, and let me go through John real quick. I'm going to go through another portion. And this is when Jesus had predicted his departure. And I'm going to read John 7:25 through 30. They said, "Who are you?" they questioned. "Precisely, what have you been telling from the very beginning?" Jesus told them, "I have many things to say and to judge about you, but the one who sent me is true, and what I have heard from him, these things I tell the world." So they did not know what he was speaking about the Father. So Jesus said to him, "When the Son of Man is lifted," oh, my bad. Sorry, guys. Wrong verses here. I apologize. As you can tell, I'm nervous, so forgive me. I know, I can't get past it. I'm trying. So, the identity of the Messiah. So it's chapter 7, verse 25. So some of the people in Jerusalem were saying that, "Is this the man they want to kill? Yet look, he's speaking publicly and they're saying nothing to him. Can it be true that the authorities know he is the Messiah? But we know where this man is from. When the Messiah comes, nobody will know where he's from." And he was teaching in the temple complex, and Jesus cried out, "You know me, you know where I'm from, yet you not come to my own. The one who sent me is true, and you don't know him. I know him because I am from him." And they tried to seize him, yet no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. However, many in the crowd believed in him and said, "When the Messiah comes, he won't perform more signs than this man has done already." So he's teaching, and again, the temple guard didn't go after him. And then we have another portion, again, and I'm going into depth with the temple guard because there's a portion that hopefully you guys will understand if I didn't add to your confusion. In John 7, and we're going to go to 45, it says, "And the temple police came to the chief priests and Pharisees, who asked them, 'Why haven't you brought him?' And the police answered, 'No man has ever spoken like this.' The Pharisees responded to them, 'Are you fooled too? How many of the rulers believed in him? Or any of the Pharisees? But the crowd, which didn't know the law, is such accursed.'" So that's just some examples of we seeing the temple guard not arresting him. Now the temple guard, they're all Levites. They come from two tribes. There was three that stood out from the tribe of Levi. There was a priestly line and then the servant line, the Korhites and the Merarites. In Numbers 16, the Korhites decided, hey, we want to do the priestly duties. They wanted to do part of the elevated work. So they challenged Aaron. And Moses, during the time of Moses, they challenged Aaron. And Moses said, okay. And then they said, bring incense and we'll see what happens. So the Korhites in this challenge brought out incense, and Aaron brought out incense. And as it turns out, God didn't like their incense. So he killed 250 of them on the spot. And those are the Korhites. So the Korhites learned from that point forward, and if you understand the way the Jewish history is repeated, it's oral tradition, and it's something that's remembered. They tend not to forget these things. So the Korhites understood that their role was to do what the priest said, and they didn't deviate. And the Korhites were bakers. They did some of the butchering, they did maintenance, but they also maintained a police force, which is a temple police. But they knew their place and they understood authority. Now in this case, they're going against the priestly demand of bringing Jesus in. So when you think about this is saying, why are they recognizing the authority of Jesus and not doing anything about it? But they're not listening to the priests. So they're actually conflicted when you read this. And I'm making an assumption about the confliction, but they seem like they're conflicted because they're not following the priest's orders. They're actually saying, this man speaks with such authority, like they didn't know what to do. It kind of just made them not want to challenge the way they threw out their history back in the time of Numbers. They didn't want to challenge the high priest. So it's like they're recognizing Jesus as a high priest. I mean, that's an assumption, but that's the mindset. They didn't want to touch him, even though they were under strict orders by the priests. And then I can go into the Pharisees. I know we've gone through the Pharisee story so many times. One of my favorite ones is I think in John chapter 8, when Jesus actually is talking to the Pharisees, and one of the statements that he made was, before Abraham was, I am. And that's actually one of my favorite verses when I read it. But the one that's following up to that is, I think, 2 chapters later in John chapter 10, where he healed a blind man by simply spitting in the dirt and just making this mud patch and putting it over this guy's eye. And if that doesn't kind of mimic, maybe even jokingly, I don't know, but if it doesn't mimic the creation aspect of making or healing from dirt and just his spit, that drove the Pharisees crazy at that time. They really were going after him, and they really wanted to kill him at that time. So the Pharisees, it kind of like, they weren't able to comprehend him. Every time they tried to challenge him, he would push back successfully. Now, to understand the Pharisees, just know that they have different kinds of training levels, and they come from all the tribes. Most of the Levites did do work at the temple at the time, but the other tribes would make up the Pharisees' groups. And so if you were, bright enough, if you knew how to read and write, and you can maintain, I guess, a bit of good conversation, but retain the first 5 books, the Torah and the law, then you would actually be considered to go into training as a Pharisee. So if you were just hitting the line, right, you could actually make it, to a level like, working in some of the desert towns in the Judea area. And then you'd be taught by someone. I guess the equivalent education here would be like going to the University of Georgia. So if you do it just minimal, right, it'd be like that. For some who were a little bit more intelligent and they actually had the knack, right, they would actually get training probably closer to Jerusalem or some of the bigger cities, or maybe one of the port cities. And those are the ones that were intelligent. That training, they would end up being under a Pharisee that I guess the equivalent training would be like, going to the University of Florida or UCLA. And then the real muckety-mucks, I guess you want to call them, the ones that were doing all the challenging, they would get the top-level Pharisees to train them. And that would be like being trained at like Stanford, Harvard, or Yale. That's the equivalent of a Pharisee being trained, and they'd end up being trained in like Jerusalem. I mean, that's the top tier. And we know that Paul was actually one of those Pharisees that was being trained at that level, and he was from the tribe of Benjamin. But everything that they tried to throw at Jesus, all the questions, all the tests, the healing tests, they never questioned his healing capabilities. That was not even coming into question. What was going on was, is he going to do it on the Sabbath? They were so focused on the day he was going to do it, not what he was doing, because they didn't even question that. They knew it. They knew that he was going to heal them. They even put a person, which normally they wouldn't do in a synagogue. They wouldn't put a person who was actually lame or disabled or anything like that. They wouldn't put him in the front row. They would actually make him stand in the back. But just to test him, they would bring him out, and they would make sure that Jesus sees him. And of course, we know the character of Jesus. He has compassion. He heals him, and then he chastises him. They question him. They throw all these tricks at him, the words and twisting the words and the law, and every time he always had a statement, up until the last one about the taxes, when they gave him a coin, and they said, whose image on there? And they said, Caesar's. And he said, okay, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God's. And that was the last time they questioned him. It pretty much broke their brains. I don't know if you guys understand what I mean by broken brains. I work in the information technology field, and sometimes I can get stumped. And Google doesn't have the answer, so I'm literally stumped. So my brain actually stops for a bit, and it doesn't function. I can't get past a certain point. And these guys actually hit that point. So after all this, they turn him over to the Sanhedrin, and then they accuse him, and then they put him on the cross to die. So I'm going to go back to the top level, the Stanford, Yale type of person, which is Paul. And Paul, I think, suffered from the broken brain the most, because he was so zealous for the law, right, that he went after the Christians that believed. And he didn't hesitate. He would go after them, put them in jail, prison, and not just in the regional area, but he actually went to different countries to actually do it within the empire. But the road to Damascus moment, when Paul got baptized, he came to that point to where he couldn't comprehend. Even though he believed, and then he had to escape because they were actually chasing him, he became the hunted instead of the hunter at that point. So he spent some time in the Arabian area. And we try to understand, what Paul's going through. And I think it was a real difficult time for him. And what he says here in Galatians chapter 1, it says, now I want you to know, brothers, that the gospel preached by me is not based on human point of view, for I did not receive it from human source, and I was not taught it, but it came to me by revelation from Jesus Christ. For you have heard about my former way of life in Judaism. I persecuted God's church to an extreme degree, and I tried to destroy it. And I advanced in Judaism beyond my many contemporaries. I guess he was a humble guy. He says, I advanced in Judaism beyond my many contemporaries among my people because I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But when God, who from my mother's womb set me apart and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, that I could preach him among the Gentiles. And I immediately didn't consult with anyone. I did not go up to Jerusalem to those who had become apostles before me. Instead, I went to Arabia and then back to Damascus. Then after 3 years, he went to go see the other apostles. Paul, from his education, because he was, I don't know if he was actually a Pharisee yet, but he was really close to achieving that level. He couldn't grasp what happened to him on the road, and I'm assuming, as anybody who uses the logical thought process, he was going through everything that he learned, trying to figure out, like, what am I experiencing? What just happened? Why is it happening like this? And Paul comes to the realization that this Jesus was more than what he understood from the law and the prophets and everything. It was actually, I don't want to say beyond his comprehension, because I'm sure he comprehended. They just didn't see at that level. Same with the Pharisees. They didn't grasp who was right in front of them. Even though they knew the law, they understood what was going on. But Paul actually goes in Colossians 1, and he writes something. And this is something, when we read, it confused me a couple times when I read it many years ago, because I've heard it twisted as well, about Jesus and his beginning, to where we understand, Pastor Carl covered that in Genesis, where we see Jesus from the beginning prior to creation, and things that he's going to cover in Genesis. And actually, when I read through the Old Testament, I've actually seen what I know is the pre-incarnate Jesus several times appear. But Paul writes in verse 15, says, he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Because in him everything was created in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. He is the head of the body in the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might have come to the first place in everything. Some people say that shows that Jesus was created. And I know that Pastor Carl actually talked about this too, and it's not that he was actually a firstborn. It just shows a placement. I think he covered that a couple of weeks back. It shows that he was king before all this. He actually reigned before all. And when he walked this earth during his 3.5-year ministry, he was actually a king in plain clothes. Yet people didn't want to recognize that then. Paul, this is about 20 years or so after his conversion, Paul got it. And like I said, it took him a long time. And we realize now, Paul, in depth, the way he wrote, he actually was so transformed because of his understanding of the past that he actually grasped what happened when Jesus was here, and he's actually covering what's going to happen in the future. Because of the depth of understanding that he had before, he actually gave us the understanding that we could read now in most of the letters. Because Paul can write a mean letter. I mean, great letters. And some of those letters, I mean, they cut to the heart. Some of them are nice and cute, short ones, and then you got Romans, and yeah. And those of us who actually went through the study here with Pastor Carl in Romans, that was an in-depth and real, it was a great study. But actually, this is what I'm saying, is Paul actually recognizes the preeminence of Christ. There was no twist in what he said. There's no self-creating. He is the Alpha and the Omega. In Revelation 22:13, he says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. He was, he is, and forever will be. So now I'm going to go back and jump to what we covered last week in Genesis chapter 3. And we're going to go through a contrast here. I don't want to say a comparison, because truthfully, the only comparison that we have is Adam and Eve was tempted, and Jesus was tempted. We can't compare anything else because the outcomes are different, the behaviors are different. Everything is quite different from what we learned last week from the conversation. So we learn in Genesis chapter 2, God told Adam, hey, you're free to eat. He didn't say, hey, I added that. I'm sorry, guys. God said to Adam, you're free to eat from any tree in the garden. And this was before Eve was created. So Adam was told directly, one thing. It's one of those jokes, when you say you have one job. That was Adam's job. Take care of everything. Just don't touch, don't eat this. Not touch. He didn't say touch. He said don't eat from here. So it was a simple command. Now, I'm making an assumption that Adam told Eve because she was the one that did the repeating to it of that command to the serpent. She added the don't touch portion of it. So they had access to the garden, and they were able to eat from any of the fruit that was there. Now I'm going to read Matthew chapter 4 real quick, and I'm going to cover the portion of Jesus being tempted. And this is right after he was baptized. So in chapter 4, verse 1, it says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness and was tempted by the devil. After he fasted 40 days and 40 nights. I don't know if you guys ever fasted. The most, and I'm not bragging here, I was really grumpy, so I didn't do it with a happy heart. 5 days. And by day 3, I was angry. By day 4, I was angrier. And by day 5, Lydia's my wife, by the way. She was not happy because she was fasting with me. So imagine that under one roof. So the only thing I was having was black coffee. Other than that, I didn't have a TV to go to. I didn't use my phone. Anyways, and the food part of it. So 40 days. Think about that. Unless you're stranded on a life raft or something, you're going through a real difficult time or whatever. 40 days is a long time not to eat. Like I said, in 5 days, I was not a good Christian. In fact, I might have even questioned that for a minute because it was like the things that were in my heart was not good. So here's Jesus, 40 days. Here's our example on this earth, right? This is who we're supposed to be like, Christ-like. 40 days and 40 nights. And he was hungry, it says. Then the tempter approached him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. But he answered, it is written. And Jesus was repeating Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. It says, man must not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city, and he had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down. And again, I'm also afraid of heights too, so I wouldn't even think about this. I don't know, some of you guys might have jumped out of planes or whatever, or have no problem with heights. I have a fear of heights. I'll use a ladder, but flying, anything like that, I kind of freak out. But he's saying, go to the top. That's the confidence that Satan has in the words that he's using. So, and then Jesus' response, for it is written, he will give his angels orders concerning you. That's Satan saying those words. Because Satan used, for it is written. And they will support you with their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus told them, it is also written. So Satan used the it is written portion of it. Jesus is responding with, it is also written. So he's actually challenging them with the words that Satan's trying to use to twist it. And Jesus responds with Psalms 91, 11, and 2. It says, do not test the Lord your God. So we see Jesus using the word against the guy who knows the word. And we know that Satan knows the word more than any of us, more than me. And he's trying to twist the words. And Jesus is responding with, it is also written. And again, keep in mind, 40 days, 40 nights, no food. No food. So imagine if you're really cranky, right? I'm not going to speak for him because I'm not even close to being him, but he was beyond hangry. but he's taking the time to actually quoting the word. And he's doing it in a peaceful manner. And again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, I will give you all these things if you will fall down and worship me. And Jesus told him, go away, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and the angels began to come and serve him. And Jesus was repeating Deuteronomy 6:13. When we look at those temptations, we actually have some comparison, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do it justice. But when we look at turning the stones into bread, and again, Jesus was hungry. He could have done it if he so chose to, but he stood fast. Where we looked, and that's actually the lust of the flesh. That was a test that he was going through. It was like a fleshly test of, I'm hungry. I'll just make this bread real quick. Now we see that, and we're going to see it in the future where they look at the fruit, Adam and Eve, and they said it looked good, so it's actually the same kind of temptation. I don't want to say exactly the same, but that's what they kind of saw with the fruit. And again, I won't be able to do it justice the way Pastor Carl can. But when we look at the temple, right, that actually is like a pride of life. Like, look at me. Like, if he actually did that the way Satan said to do it, that's like to go up to the pinnacle of the temple. That's actually like, everyone's going to see me, watch me what I do, and watch how I get saved or how I save myself. That's actually a prideful moment. And that's what Satan was kind of pushing him to do. And when we look at the temptation with the serpent, right, he was actually kind of edging Eve on at that time for the pride, like, oh, come on, you can do this. What's going to stop you? It's not that bad. You can do it. It was like a pride thing. And for the kingdom, the third temptation that Jesus went through, it was like for the lust of the eyes. If you think about it, when you're looking at, all these kingdoms, and again, keep in mind, 40 days, 40 nights, no food, and you're seeing all these kingdoms, and by the way, he's king. Jesus is king. He knows it. And he's going through this temptation. It's actually a test of lust for the eyes. And people think of lust like it could just be a physical thing, but it's actually many things that lust can actually take and consume you with. And so that was a challenge. And as we're going to read with the fruit was also, it looked good. Hey, but again, they had a whole garden of fruit that they can eat from at their fill. A whole garden. But that fruit looked good. I want that one. And that was the test that Jesus went through in the same manner. All these splendor of kingdoms, one fruit. It was the lust of the eyes. So now we're going to look at the difference here. Sorry, I think that's one of the differences. So I got to be careful. I don't like to assume much when I'm reading. But Adam was told directly not to eat from one tree. So it was a simple command. And again, I said that Eve also heard it because God told them before she was created. And so she heard it from Adam. I'm assuming that unless God told her, but it doesn't say in the Word. So I'm assuming also that they were full. They weren't hungry because they were able to eat from all the fruit, all the trees that were in the garden except for the one. So we're comparing 40 days and 40 nights, no food. They're in the garden, and they have access to all of it except for one tree. So, full belly, maybe. 40 days, 40 nights, no food. That's one of the temptations. And when we look at the temptation itself in the garden, where Pastor covered last week, it came from a serpent. Where Adam should have understood, basically, and again, assumption, but it's like, hey, snake, I named you. Like, he had dominion over the snake because God gave him dominion over the area. I named you. What are you talking about? But nothing was said. But Satan shows up as himself when he's tempting Jesus, because we know that he can't hide himself from Jesus. There's no way. Even if he's 40 days, 40 nights, no food, there's no way that Jesus is going to fall for any trick, any guise, any kind of gimmick or mischief that Satan's going to play. So he just shows up as himself, and there's no question about that. And again, the bread portion, it's actually small. It's a small request that he's saying, hey, just turn these rocks into stone. When we read from the serpent, he says, really, you can't eat from any of the tree of the garden? The woman said, we may not eat of the fruit. When the tree in the middle of the garden, you must not eat it or touch it or die. And Satan's like, no, you will not die. Come on. And again, it's something really small. But Jesus stood firm and stood fast and reverted the word, where Eve, trying to use the word of God, didn't actually, she added to it, and she wasn't actually standing firm the way the words are being spoken here. Again, we're just reading what's written there, but the interaction. And so they were falling for it, but again, is it that they were falling for it, or is it because of the pride of life? Is it because of the physical wanting of, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea? And again, with the knowledge is a pride portion of it. When the serpent tempted them with the knowledge portion, it'll say, in fact, God, let's see here. In fact, God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Pride. And he tempted him with pride. And again, I don't want to give it away. I think Pastor Carl's going to come and teach about it next week. So I don't want to give it away, but I do think she eats the fruit. I'm not going to, just in case, I don't want to spoil it for you guys if you haven't read ahead. So we actually look here, in one of Paul's comparisons, we have the first Adam and we have the last Adam. And we have this comparison of how to deal with temptation and what actually happens when you fall. So we know that the first Adam failed. The last Adam is forever successful. We know that the first Adam ate and it brought death. We know that Jesus died. He rose again and he defeated death. And again, I don't want to ruin it for you guys, but they lose access to the tree of life in the garden. But at the end, we know that we get access back to the tree of life afterwards through the work of Christ. Adam had not sinned yet until they ate and they were hiding. But victory was when he bled and died and rose again. So that's a small contrast, if I can say, between the temptations that Jesus went through, which we know that I don't, again, like I said, and I'm not boasting because I'm not going to do it again, 5 days. But that is the example that we have to stand by. And it doesn't mean that you got to go do it for 40 days. It's just standing firm in the Word, which actually will always carry you, because every answer that you need is here. As long as you seek it, you absorb it, you treat it like daily bread, you treat it like a temple, and you treat it like a kingdom's guide. I'm going to leave with this, guys. 1 John chapter 2. It It says, do not love the world or these things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's own possessions, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world with its lust is passing away, but the one who does the will of the Father, or the will of God, remains forever. Thank you, guys.